right, and we are live. And welcome everybody. I have with me again today Mr. J.J. Semple, author of many excellent books on Secret of the Golden Flower meditation, and Kundalini type experiences. Here to talk with us today. And welcome, JJ. How are you doing?
I'm good.
So you have shared with me a document here that you penned in two topics, and I'm going to read through some parts of this, and then we'll discuss it and talk about it. So you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Topic 1. What has the furor around Kundalini proven? Have any so-called Kundalini adepts from the current Kundalini craze, men or women, emerged as leaders, scientists, teachers, or geniuses? Not to my knowledge. But wait, am I knocking so-and-so's method of work? No, I'm merely pointing out it's important to question claims of enlightenment or awakened Kundalini, as well as premises, statements, and beliefs, no matter how attached to them as writers and practitioners we may become. Nothing should be treated as gospel.
Yeah, that's right. Ouspensky pointed that out, saying we must verify everything we see, hear, feel, meaning empirically and scientifically. And I think that with the 20 years ago, there was nothing. There was no internet, or well, let's say 25 years ago. When we get down to 1990, there was really no internet, so there wasn't a lot of information about Kundalini that one could get without going to a kind of so-called spiritual bookstore. At that time, I was aware of it because I've been working with it since 1970, and I met Gopi Krishna in 1977, and we did skirt on that. I did ask him if I thought the a kind of a mask lemmings effect of people getting into Kundalini would start some kind of of an evolutionary upgrade. And he said, well, there are billions of people on Earth and we are evolving, maybe at a slow pace, but that's the pace evolution works at. It takes a long time for any new quality to be vetted, beneficial or negative or neutral. And I don't think that he intimated that he didn't believe that we would somehow, in strip mall yoga classes, actually have an influence on evolution, that we might have a slight personal improvement of consciousness and how to live a more socially and economically and to care for nature, that type of life, but that we weren't going to actually jumpstart evolution. Environmental, yeah. So all the challenges we have nowadays are we should be facing them from an environmental point of view, because that's the most imminent of the problems that we need to solve. If we can do that, then we open the door maybe for quicker evolution, which evolution is working as we talk, with or without any yoga classes or strip mall Kundalini meditation classes.
Yeah, that makes me think, evolution is working, whether I'm there for it or not. So really part of my call to action is to be there for it, is to be present for it. And part of this whole work with like the golden flower is like a realization. The kind of awakening that you are talking about here is like a realization that I have not been present for this until now.
Yeah, and in that presence, inside that presence, there should be a way that each individual has to operate to do the most good. And obviously, a doctor can just follow their what they've studied in, become a better doctor. If the time comes when doctors and scientists decide that that Kundalini is something they'd like to study, they can do a lot of good there, because they might be able to develop tests, either tests having to do with artificial intelligence or some other type of thing to measure the actual emanation of Kundalini in somebody's body. Or that's the way I see it. But like somebody like myself, I think the best way, rather than bragging about how great it is to activate Kundalini or advising people to do it, there's a lot of risks. So I might as well just concentrate on what I can contribute. And I think that's, in terms of my contribution, would be something along the lines in the ecology, taking care of the planet.
Mm. So I'll continue. The next paragraph. Lastly, should we be advocating and endorsing Kundalini as an easy to arouse experience that anyone can learn, that there are no dangers along the way? I'm beginning to believe it's not, especially since there are so few practitioners, if any, capable of remediating a Kundalini experience gone awry.
Yeah, what I mean about remediating is somehow I get lots of calls from people say they're in pain, and from pain all the way down a whole list of adverse sensations that they're suffering from, and asking me what they can do, and I have no answer. I can't get inside them and stop the energy from flowing. And if it is flowing in the wrong ways, and it can happen, it happened to Gopi Krishna, but he eventually got over it. People may suffer, and I think we went into it a little bit in the last segment, and that's about the only thing I've gotten pulled more and more back on, just blankets saying, "Oh, go try this method. It's good. You'll if that's what you're looking for, don't listen to that method. Try this method." I'm to the point where I'm saying any method is dangerous in the trying and then after living with it, because it does take over a certain degree of your autonomic functions, and it conflicts with your regular biological functions. It's not going to kill you, but the two things, your regular biology and your Kundalini, are working in parallel, and sometimes they overlap into each other's domain, and you suffer accordingly, and there's no way to get out. There's I don't know of any person that can you can give, unless it's a purely medical thing. I don't know of any way that, or any person that's able to counsel or advise someone when that does happen.
They kind of have to figure it out for themselves, right?
Well, all along the whole process, you have to be your own best detective, and that sounds like corny or something. Like, what does this guy mean? It means that you'll start to feel sensations once, and some of the sensations, it's really the Kundalini takes over the nervous system, or at least uses it in parallel. And probably there's additional neural type passages that are unique to the Kundalini energy. And it takes inventory into your being of what's wrong. And then one by one, it compiles a list of what's wrong, and it tries to then shovel life force energy to those spots to clear it up. And some of this, that can, like I had varicose veins on account of Kundalini. They just appeared after. Well, about 15 years later, energy was funneled into the bottom of that same leg and just slowly climbed up, like just moving my hands like tight along my leg. And as they moved up, the varicose veins disappeared. So, I mean, if I'd been under supervision of a doctor or somebody, they could have seen something that I knew was an effect of Kundalini, but they might not believe it. But it has that capability of working on the surface of your being, of your body, as well as behind the scenes.
So does this mean that have you kind of had second thoughts about the books? Because you published a number of I thought really good books on the experience of that awakening of Kundalini. Does that mean that you think that maybe it could be causing more harm than good?
I don't think it's more harm than good, because there's certain amount of websites that do this counseling, and I'm sure they're well-meaning, and they may even have a positive effect, but they exist. Now, in the gatherings I go to, Kundalini-related gatherings I go to, I see some people, a smaller percentage, who are in pain or having problems, and most people are at least talking about Kundalini in a positive way. Now, whether they really experienced Kundalini is another thing that we'll get into later on in this conversation, because I believe there's a lot more claims to a Kundalini awakening than there are actual awakenings.
Yeah, the thing that I think about with this question, and I think it's a big question, like Secret of the Golden Flower and stuff like your books and Gopi Krishna. I didn't seek those. I didn't find those until after I had experienced something which I couldn't explain. And so that kind of led me on a pursuit. Now, I don't know what it would be like if I read about them. This is something, I'm just sharing this with you. This is something I think about.
Yeah.
What if I had found those books, like your books or Gopi Krishna, before I'd had an experience? What would that have done? Would I've gotten anything? Because I read Secret of the Golden Flower a couple of decades ago. And, this is another piece of, mystical stuff that I've read, some interesting ideas, and I just moved on from it. And I didn't really, I mean, that book tells you everything that could happen. Right. But I didn't take it. I just didn't see it. I just didn't see that as being what it was really like saying, even though it was right there in front of my face. So there's that question of the knowledge without the experience, or Ouspensky, again, he talked about knowledge and being, right? Like knowledge isn't enough.
Yeah.
Being isn't enough. There needs to be some balance
activity,
there, some hookup there,
practice.
The order in which you find it, I guess,
Well, just like you, I started out from a spiritual aspect because of my first contact with Kundalini even though the book, that word Kundalini wasn't mentioned in the Secret of the Golden Flower, was again the Secret of the Golden Flower. That was my first contact. So naturally, I took a kind of at the beginning. I mean, I was in my 30s. This was 1972. I was influenced and thought of this more as a spiritual happening. And as I've grown older and lived with Kundalini for almost 60 years, I see it more as a scientific experience. That this is an actual scientific activity that's just like the endocrinal subsystem. The body has all sorts of subsystems at work. You know, the venal system, the bone structure, the kidneys, and this is an actual subsystem of the body, but it's not known and not perceivable by more than the individual when it strikes, when it's aroused. And so gradually over time, I figured out, or at least it became clear to me, that I needed to look at this more from a scientific point of view than a spiritual point of view. Because when you get into the spiritual thing, you just there's no verification, there's no like cataloging of effects and sensation. So you don't know, everything's different. And every experience is different. And that's a big move, to move from a spiritual attitude. Not that you're taking a religious stand, that you're saying you know this is some, you know, God's something, but that it isn't spiritual at all. And that's one of the big hang-ups now, because most people believe that it's some kind of a spiritual thing, and they're into all sorts of other stuff, trying to cram it into a certain pigeonhole in the spiritual canon. And the Secret of the Golden Flower is a mixture of Buddhist doctrine and actual steps of practice, of a meditation practice. And that's when it's really, that's the value of it there. The Buddhist stuff, and I leave that aside, but at beginning, I was influenced by that. By what's there, it must have some meaning. I've got to maybe believe in that. Well, I figured out that none of that was really central to the core practice of the method that's explained in and described in The Secret of the Golden Flower.
All right, I'll continue on. Gopi Krishna called Kundalini the evolutionary energy, which means it is part of an evolutionary mechanism which has in no way been influenced by the present Kundalini craze, a craze that attempts to include every claim of enlightenment, real or imagined, as bona fide examples of an active Kundalini. If all individual efforts suddenly stopped, the evolutionary mechanism would continue on its own. Has the present craze jump-started any evolutionary changes? I doubt it. I hate calling it a craze, but that's what it's turning out to be, a buzzword seen on strip mall placards.
Well, we've already gone over that one, I think,
okay.
Pretty much. That, there's Google has a thing that they call, I forget what they call it, but it's a frequency chart. And you can input a word or a little phrase, and it will go back in history and return a graph of the incidence of use of that particular word or phrase. So if you put in a word like meditation, and you set the dates from 1800 to 2023, you're going to get back something with it's a slowly building graph. Some things it peaks in the 1900s and then drops down. I've done it with a number of different phrases and words, and it's useful. Of course, if you put in Kundalini, you're going to see something happening as of 1960, whereas there was practically nothing happening before. So it's just a mechanism to show how people, how mass use of certain terms can influence people into studying or practicing something, or just lending legitimacy to something because it's used by lots of people. And that's the case with Kundalini right now, is it's a buzzword.
Next it says, after meeting Gopi Krishna, I formulated 2 questions that I asked people who read my books and wanted me to vet their Kundalini arousal. Number 1, after ejaculation, do you feel an all-consuming weakness? Number 2, did you experience, as Gopi Krishna described so eloquently, feel a tongue of golden flame searching my stomach for food?
This I think should be the bare minimum test for Kundalini, because, again, women ask me if there's something preventing a woman. This was a while back. I mean, currently, I think most women know more about Kundalini now than they did, and they might have thought that men can do it, but women can't because there was no literature on it. The Buddhist literature tended to favor males rather than females. But this should be the bare minimum test. And what it really consists of is the whole idea of sexual sublimation and the repurposing of semen. Either it's used for everything, everything from porn to childbearing on the one side, or it's used to be repurposed. In other words, distilled into an elixir and sent up the spine into the brain for a Kundalini experience or some sort of experience. And right now, I don't think we have even a minimal test. And what this test consists of is, okay, after ejaculation, man or woman, the first time after their so-called Kundalini experience, what did they feel? Because both Gopi Krishna and I felt a dramatic weakness where we were like thinking our bodies, our life force has been stopped, and we're going to just drizzle down to a state close to dying, and maybe even ultimately die. So I dove into the refrigerator and gobbled down 3 little containers of yogurt that set me right, but not completely. And I just went to sleep and slept for like 24 hours. And same thing with Gopi Krishna. Then he talks about the searching in his stomach for food, and he goes on further to explain that he had to have something to eat. And that's a physiological experience that someone can say, okay, I've had a Kundalini experience, which is physical / metaphysical / physiological. And it's a basic test. Like, okay, so you say you've had it. If you need to, if you don't have a partner, masturbate and then find out how you feel after. If you feel nothing, I wonder if you've had a Kundalini experience, because it really is. Once it's in place, it's got to be fed food and prana, which means clean air and water, and clean natural foods to continue to do its work. And that's why I think an army of Kundalini adepts would be impossible, because everybody has to stop to eat every time they felt tired. Because Kundalini, even when you're not, when you haven't exactly, Kundalini demands a continuous supply of food. I don't mean to stuff yourself, but just a continual, snacking nuts and dried fruits, if nothing else.
So I recall somewhere Gopi Krishna talked about when he was like becoming incredibly sick after his like awakening. He was vegetarian, or he was going like vegan, and eventually he just sort of intuitively went and ate a little bit of meat, and it's like that like brought him back. So it almost sounds like that Kundalini, that awakening, that like other intelligence that's operating in you, giving you a suggest, or trying to let you know, this is what I need, this is what we need, like sort of tapping your intuition. And so you're experiencing changes in what you would normally want.
Absolutely. That's a good example of what I'm talking about, is that there's got to be a baseline test that explores, that tries to verify something at least happening, because it's, again, you get caught up in the spiritual bandwagon, and so many people that do that I've talked to have mixed together Kundalini and something else. And about the only thing that I've mixed together, which is that I practice in conjunction with Kundalini meditation, is self-remembering, which is the Ouspensky Gurdjieff philosophy, which is, I think, works very well hand in hand with Kundalini, because it's causing you to be objective, and at every point causing you to reserve and to fight off an emotional response in favor of a more self-studied response. You're in the line for a ticket at the ball game, or at the bank. You're in line, and it's going slowly, and you begin to build up this anger, like the person can't do this job, and you can do it so much better. If that idiot wasn't there. And then you just say, okay, I'm here, it's me, I'm in the line, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling what I'm feeling. And you slowly brought back to yourself. And those old sayings, like, he was beside himself, he was out of his mind, they really are meaningful, because you are beside yourself when you're, but that also gives you the chance of, when you are beside yourself, to look at yourself, to stand back from your physical being.
All right, I'm going to read the next one. Unlike out-of-body experiences, no two Kundalini experiences are the same, which makes it impossible to draw any scientific conclusions about what Kundalini is, how to activate it, or how to live with it. Books have been written about Kundalini. We know how it operates in theory. We just can't prove it's actually happening. Only one account I've read matches mine so far as the physiological symptoms experienced after ejaculation, and that was Gopi Krishna's, whose symptoms were exactly the same, which leads us to the next topic. Topic 2, the role of sex.
Let's stop there. Let's stop
Okay.
there. And Yeah. What was the beginning of that?
Unlike out-of-body experiences.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a good.
Yeah.
That's a good comparison. If you look at, and there are lots of books on out-of-body experience and near-death experience, and if you look into those books, you'll find that the symptoms are pretty much the same in each case. I would posit that both of those are subsets of Kundalini, of the Kundalini activity, that there's strong enough Kundalini activity going on that you, even though you're charted as, they're flatlined and you're charted as deceased for a given period before waking up, that the symptoms, one experience to another, no matter everywhere in the world, are pretty much the same. Therefore, they can be studied. Are there physiological and other proofs that they are actually taking place? Yes, because you could have that flat line that you can look at, and the reawakening. And there's also cases where somebody has been clinically dead, in other words, in the throes of near-death experience, and people walk into the room, and let's say a nurse has on an orange blouse, and then she leaves the room, and that's the only time that person has been exposed to her. And then after he's revived, he says to the nurse the next time she comes in, "What happened to your orange blouse?" So that's a good indication. If those are true, I mean, I've read about them. I don't know. I wasn't there. But if that's accurate, that's something, because a clinically dead person should not be able to have that kind of knowledge. And it also means that there's activity immediately after death, some other kind of activity, that our beings are not just stopped at. And it's a case for reincarnation, a very slight case, but I think that near-death experience kind of points to reincarnation.
I think there's a lot in there, because the other thing I thought of with out-of-body experiences is that's another thing that Secret of the Golden Flower talks about, is that the creation of a body within the body. It's like the progression is there's an awakening, of this force, this intelligence within me, and one of the things that force does, it's managing things, at some kind of level, biologically, physiologically, and it's also working on the creation or coding of that additional body. And that second body, that's something that, like Ouspensky and Gurdjieff talk about that, and they equate that. They also call it the emotional body, or they say it's sometimes called the astral body. So when people talk about out-of-body experiences, a lot of that literature is like that. You see that term astral body comes up in there. So it's not surprising that there's a connection in there somewhere. That Secret of the Golden Flower talks about creation of a second body, but that's one of the things that it talks about in there. So I mean, it's so out-of-body experiences, it's kind of part of the whole, it's part of the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah, I had an out-of-body, my first out-of-body experience occurred when I was like 19 years old. I was having my appendix out in the hospital. And the hospital, the first night, the nurse came in and gave me a shot of morphine. The second night also, and the third night once again. And at that point, I was asleep, and I felt my body leave. I felt my one of those astral or one of the body, I don't know which one, leave my physical body and rise to the ceiling of the room and turn around with great effort. I turned it around and it looked down on my physical body. And at that point, I knew that I could use that spirit body to go anywhere I wanted, but that I might not be able to get back. And then when that thought came to mind, I went back into my physical body. But I mean, that was actually a real experience. And will we ever be able to record those? I believe we will. That science and will eventually, if we don't destroy ourselves in mass suicide, I believe we will uncover the means to vet this type of experience and Kundalini experience. Because for a near-death experience to be successful, there must be an overriding Kundalini that brings you back, that you are sufficiently have that life force energy in you, that's been working. Because some people have Kundalini experiences from doing nothing. I mean, they did absolutely nothing. And again, do you test people to find out? I mean, our little test that I've spoken about. Will people get uptight about being asked to do that? I don't know. I think it would be the least, the minimum that one could try, or at least give testimony about.
It's touchy. It's one of those subjects people don't like talking about.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that I think that brings us to topic.
Which turns me to topic 2, which is all about. So go ahead.
Yep, exactly. Topic 2, the role of sex in the evolutionary process. The evolutionary energy again. There's a lot of fallacious thinking around Kundalini. How could a dirty, unchaste activity like sex have anything to do with a celestial phenomenon like Kundalini? This kind of thinking places Kundalini in a religious context when it really belongs to science.
Yeah, that's. I would say, and this is again an opinion more than fact, but it's a deduction from my own experience, and that is, I was very in my late puberty, early adolescence of 11, 12 years old. I found out about, I don't know how it happened. I don't think an older boy told me. I think it just, there was such a thing as masturbation, and you get into it and you feel this wave of pleasure and you do it more and more. And it's actually wasteful. And in The Secret of the Golden Flower, they preach about conserving the seed. Well, 12-year-olds are
mm-hmm.
So you carry that on, and when you get older, there's this drive to people with an active libido to find a partner, whether it's men with another man or men with whoever, with a woman or whatever. And this is it can become a way of life, and at the same time you might be feeling this gnawing impulse to meditate or to practice yoga or something. And sometimes it's just from internal, or sometimes you're exposed to something, either a book or just a sign you drive by touting a yoga class, and you get into it, and then you see the conflict, because the more you learn, the more you see that there's a conflict between wasting the life force, in other words, ejaculating, and repurposing it up, like I described, like distilling it into an elixir and moving it up the spine, or having it drawn up the spine as it did with me. And ultimately, those two purposes are in conflict. And let's say then, okay, you have enough spiritual life force energy to awaken Kundalini, and so you've got these two things going within your body. You still want to have sex with a woman, in my case, and you know that the sperm must be repurposed and processed into an elixir and feed the brain. So how do you get out of one and into another? And this book that I wrote on that subject that I've just finished is an account of a fictional account of one person's life, starting with an early age, with earliest sexual encounters, right through to learning about Kundalini, learning about meditation, learning about the sexual sublimation, and then trying to chart his life course in a positive way, so that the seed will not be wasted. Which is, I wrote a book on seminal. It's called Seminal Retention and Higher Consciousness: The Sexology of Kundalini, and basically it describes. I mean, there's no absolute how. Some people are better at it than others. Some people, but basically it's that, using that technique of seminal retention, so that your partner, you actually have a orgasm, but you don't lose any semen, and your partner is satisfied. It's a satisfactory partner for satisfactory process for both of you.
So now I have to pause and I have to ask you: are you familiar with Mantak Chia?
Yeah.
So he talks about some of that, and he wrote a book, Taoist Male Sexuality or something like that, where he talks about techniques for that. So is that kind of what you're talking about here?
Absolutely. I even had a short chapter in, let me see, which I think it's in, I don't know if it's here. I have a short chapter in my latest book on this subject. I'm trying to see if I have it. I don't have one here. And it's the book on, it's called The Secret of the Golden Flower, a Kundalini meditation method. And the last chapter is devoted to Mantak Chia, and a bit of a comparison between the system that I was, the one derived from The Secret of the Golden Flower, and I think they're basically saying the same thing, except they've got a lot more elaborate. My method that's on my Golden Flower meditation website is a lot simpler, and there's not as many bells and whistles as that of Mantak Chia. He's got like 10, 15, maybe even more books. Well, I have 6 or 7, but his is really. And the thing is, I wonder also about after sales service, if you could call it, like what happens when something goes wrong. I've read some accounts where things go wrong with that, and it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle and cork it. And that goes for golden flower meditation in every, one of the Kundalini related topics.
Okay, so moving along, then the next piece on here. Let me read into the record this query letter from one of my readers. I think it sets up the topic better than I could. Hi, JJ Semple. Just bought your book on seminal retention and higher consciousness. I'm struggling to save the seed as you instructed, as in my dreams I have sex, and I wake up with wet sheets sometimes, spilling a little prostatic fluid sometimes, a lot, sometimes semen. Please instruct me, what should I do? Should I meditate more? Is it my diet? Is it how I am sleeping? I masturbated to porn for almost 10 years before. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, that letter has more of a urgency than 50 claims that I've heard of awakened Kundalini, because it's real. I can see how I can immediately relate to it, how real it, because of how real it is, that this guy is what I just described in the previous section, that he's looking for something and he's also struggling with sex at the same time. And it's a good place to start with being honest about your problem, and with wrestling with this whole thing of the sexuality involved and the sexual sublimation, and sex is dirty, and the more it's kept in the religious camp as opposed to scientific camp, it's something not to be talked about, or something uncomfortable, where it shouldn't really. If you're interested in so-called spiritual living, you've got to start with sex and and the role of sex in your life, because that's the only energy we have in our bodies. You eat a fried egg and bacon, and that's transformed into something else, and eventually it becomes, some portion of it becomes distilled and into an elixir, something that's not a solid, that will travel up the spine, a gaseous probably, or I don't know exactly what it's composed of, but I know I felt it during my Kundalini experience. I felt it from the first time. I had the sensation of activity in the lower belly, and figured out that was maybe possibly something big. And the next thing I knew, it started to climb the spine and gradually got into the brain. And so this is a real experience, a real sensation, and that's important not to bypass that.
Mm. And you say, I received letters and emails from readers with issues similar to Tom's. His letter, to my mind, is realer than the proclamations of individuals with holier-than-thou mystical tidings of supernatural visions, claims of enlightenment, and religious fervor. I find his letter more compelling than any 50 claims I've heard at different sorts of Kundalini gatherings.
It's that I think it's again, it's really hard to talk about Kundalini in general, because each experience is different, and so you can't compile any sort of or come to any conclusions about Kundalini. You can listen to individual accounts, but I've done that, and they just don't match up. and even even to the point of not. I've heard people talk about something. I said, well, do you feel any activity in the spine? No. Well, it's just like one day I had this. My brain. It's more like they're describing a stroke than it is my experience of Kundalini. So you're flummoxed when it comes to trying to describe what's going on.
Tom's letter highlights the struggle between two urges, both of which concern the role of sexuality. One, sexual sublimation or the repurposing of semen for metaphysical purposes, and two, the release of semen for everything from porn to procreation. Obviously, the former group has been kept in occult circles and therefore little known beyond the mystic traditions, mainly those originating in the East. The greater segment of the population has no idea of phenomena such as Kundalini are being explored by individuals in small groups all over the world.
Yeah, this book I was telling you about, halfway up the mountain, the error of premature claims to enlightenment, is a good scientific study of the whole issue of enlightenment, and I recommend it to people just to get it to help them deal with if they have problems of understanding what enlightenment is, what sexual sublimation is, and what Kundalini is. There's the author's done a good job of presenting that. It's a rather thick book, and she's taken a lot of time to write it. But it's just like reading The Fourth Way. It's science based. Pull back and look at your experience from afar, and be rational about your. And yeah, what you mentioned is also true. I mean, in that paragraph, that Kundalini is relatively new to anybody except occultists. It's part of the occult, therefore it's not that widely spread. Now we've jumped on it and starting to take in what's been for centuries part of the occult tradition, no matter if it's in the Western, there are Western mystics or Eastern mystics. But one of the things that book talks about is that we're woefully unprepared for mystical traditions in the West. That it's our whole life purpose and everything we're taught. Make money, be aggressive, are more or less opposite what's learned or what used to be learned and taught in the East. So we need to, in order for us to really get our hands around Kundalini, we need to establish a truly Western tradition around the spiritual and the metaphysical.
Yeah, I think we've spent for a long time outsourcing it. It's like spirituality is outsourced to priests and stuff to take care of that for you, and so we don't have any practice with the idea of having to look inside for things. But I mean, that's what all of this work is. All of that, attention and circulation of the light and the backward flowing method is all about looking inside.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's very, very good point. That Yeah. Um, outsourcing of, the Catholic Church was based on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess others too, that the priest was a more or less an interpreter. You tell him, and then he'd tell God.
Right.
And it doesn't, and we're talking about direct experience. There was direct experience in the West with mystics, and whose names are fairly familiar. I think Master Eckhart and other. But no. Given that intermediary step, things really got hung up, and that's why Ouspensky and The Secret of the Golden Flower and Gopi Krishna in their books talk about the practical aspect, and I do too. Is like, forget theory, get into practice. We all know what Kundalini is supposed to be, but we don't know how to live with it or how to activate it. We don't know whether we should stay with it or try to activate it, because we have no tradition to turn to get real answers. And even Gopi Krishna once wrote that when Kundalini hit, his Kundalini activated in 1938, the year I was born. So at some point after Kundalini, later on when he had activated his Kundalini, he went and toured India talking to wise people and gurus, etc., and asking them about Kundalini. And he came back, his conclusion was he learned more from rickshaw drivers and sales people in the markets, in the teeming markets of India, than he did from these so-called wise men. And this in India, which is supposed to be, or reputed to be, the most spiritual country in the world. And I mean, just as an aside, I mean that's true. I think that I can tell from my book sales in Amazon. I sell mainly in the U.S., UK, Canada, and Australia, but the next country after that is India. I get a lot of sales, but there's no sales from Pakistan because it's not there. It's that Hindu religion is not part of their tradition. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we're in the West. We're trying to become knowledgeable, but also there's that urge to I gotta protect my thing because I want to make money off it, and I can't share it with you. Whereas I share my method on free of charge on the internet. That just seems to be the only thing I can do.
Yeah, no, it's the best you can do. So this next part is where you talk about Gopi Krishna, and then there's a reading from Gopi Krishna. So maybe I'll read all the way through that part.
Yeah, that's good, I think.
Okay. When I met with Gopi Krishna in 1977, we discussed the physiological reaction he describes in his book Kundalini, the Evolutionary Energy in Man, pertaining to his ejaculation subsequent to sexual intercourse, the first time after his Kundalini awakening. This was important for me because his was an experience whose symptoms matched my own, as described in my book, Deciphering the Golden Flower One Secret at a Time. Here's what he had to say in Kundalini, the Evolutionary Energy in Man. On one occasion, after months of abstention, I prematurely had a contact with my wife. The next moment, because the energy did not come up to feed the brain, and I was in an expanded state of consciousness, I seemed to sink into a pit of horror and terror, so much so that I thought that if nothing happened to me to save me from this terrible situation, I would die. The same thing happens to the insane. Uncontrolled sex, overindulgence in sex, makes us more prone to hysteria and neurosis and psychosis, and also repression of the sexual impulse, creates the same conditions of the brain.
Yeah, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's just what I've been, another point of view from what we've been discussing.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, that's, I was, because I hadn't never heard the term Kundalini before or during my year-long attempt to awaken it. But as soon as I did find the term Kundalini, I had that same experience that Gopi Krishna talks about. That again, needing to replenish that energy after it drained out. I mean, I felt that almost in a death spiral, and that's extreme, because during my pre-Kundalini lifetime, I never felt life force either one way or another in a positive. I was just went on. I mean, my biology just kept moving on. But with when you get into Kundalini, the two forces, or the two energy, the energies are separated, and you've got the biological life you're leading with all the autonomic functions like sleep and other things like that, and the Kundalini, and they can borrow or help one another, or they can actually hinder or disaffect one another. Anyway, everybody should read The Secret of the Golden Flower and Kundalini, the Evolutionary Energy in Man. And I think, unfortunately, we have kind of Kundalini's taken on a new aspect, more of a marketed thing, where we're supposed to throw up our hands and wear pink dresses and flowing robes and participate in some kind of demonstration or festival. It's all a festival, and it's a lonely individual experience.
Yeah, what I've found is a lot of the Kundalini stuff out there, people immediately want to go into talking about chakras. You bring up the word Kundalini, and immediately goes into chakras. And I feel like that kind of leads to, I mean, I was familiar with all of that like a long time ago, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. But the way that you're talking about Kundalini and the way Golden Flower talks about it, I think is far more significant to that. It's like chakras. Well, maybe there's something to that, but I think that the idea of like awakening this dormant force and everything that it can do, and the efforts of like seminal retention and stuff are far more significant than chakras. What do you think? Or do you think chakras, do they come into play at all for you?
Well, yes, I believe that chakras exist, but I also try my utmost to avoid terminology in writing a book about Kundalini. And I mean, and that's why I dislike Kundalini, but we're stuck with it. There's not a better word. I mean, I would prefer life force, but that would probably rub people the wrong way. They'd think, oh yeah, life force. Everybody has "let the force be with you."
Right.
It would have that kind of negative connotations. So, but terminology doesn't do anyone any good, because you can discuss the subject where you're just batting around terminology and nobody knows what the hell you're saying. So I try to, in everything I write, including anything to do with a method, I don't include any terminology like chakras or, I use a physical location, lower belly, the solar plexus, and that type of thing. Or sometimes in the brain, it's difficult. So the chakras,
right,
the terminology is all right, but in any case, it's just a matter of like weighting people down with terminology, and terminology is the one thing that or is at least one thing, as I explain in my book, The Secret of the Golden Flower. The Kundalini meditation method, it's one thing where.
So I thought just to go off of what I was getting from that is that there's value in I found it's value talking about like the solar plexus, like focusing on solar plexus, the forehead, base of the spine. There's all reasons. There's all those all have like there's reasons that has to do with like I don't know, seeing this flow and attention, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of it, the work of meditation is about learning to develop attention into the body, into what's going on in here, more so than I have in ordinary life, where my attention is all split out and pulled out into the world. And so for that reason, it's like those points are necessary. I don't think I'd gain anything else for it, associating a special color or other crystal that goes with this part of my body or anything. Would just, for me, it just kind of lead me in a different direction. And I mean, that's what I appreciate about like works like yours, is that they're not burdened down with a bunch of this other jargon that doesn't really that takes me in a different direction. It's like it's just what's needed to understand this process, and it's so direct. You're so direct and so to the point, and so visceral with it, and that's something that I appreciated. That's how my mind works, anyhow.
Right.
There's people out there who want to hear about chakras, but for me,
you're true. Yeah, true. And that was the point I forgot what I was trying to make before, and that is because everybody they're centered on, let's say they're centered on Kundalini, but then they bring their own practice or their own body of theory to what they believe in, and they nurse tightly their terminology, and they hate everybody else's terminology and they want to use theirs only. It's a complete Tower of Babel, because you've got every philosophy or practice has its own terminology, and it becomes a war of terminology and a poo-pooing of someone else's terminology, and it's just self-defeating in the end. And that's why I try to be just, everyday language is what I employ in writing about this. And as you say, the solar plexus, everybody knows where that is, and the heart, everybody knows where that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. So I got one more question. I have one more question I wanted to put at you, which I think it has to do with that that book about false claims, that idea of like false claims and such as that. Do you recommend or what is your take on the question of talking about one's experiences? Like if someone like has an experience that maybe is a Kundalini awakening, should they just work quietly with that, or should they avoid going and telling their friends about it and talking about it?
Well, I imagine your podcast has a certain number of subscribers that like listening to you.
Right. Everything's out of the bag on this podcast.
Yeah, and you get answers or questions aimed at you. Or some is hate, some is support, and obviously, I don't think that you're sincere about what you're talking about, and people probably grasp that sincerity, and they want to feed back to you. And now, would I go to my I was born, I said, in 1938. So in 1950, I was 12 years old. That was the Korean War. In 68, I was 30 years old. It was a key seminal year. And I was 3 years away from activating Kundalini. If I was to go, I worked for NBC News as a film editor and producer. If I had taken what I'd known about meditation at that time in there and started talking to people at my workplace, they would have all clammed up and just left the room. So it depends on who you're talking to, I think. Even people that are holding on to their terminology or their own little subsystem, they're not going to be open. There's a fellowship near where I live. These I forget what they're called, but they call it the fellowship. It's all over the country. It's been there, and they really do. They have a big one in Washington D.C. I used to go to, and they have speakers on different topics, and I've gone to it a number of times just to see what it is. Well, it's like a social club, I've proposed to them a talk about Kundalini and about secret occult. They don't want to hear about it, so why press it? They want to have a yard sale or talk about so and so's new job, all of which is cool, but it's hard to get people to listen about your favorite thing, or even if it's not your favorite thing, about a thing that's happening in your life. Mm-hmm. They have to be. I think it's much easier to do something like you're doing. Is you put it out there, and people will find it that need to find it.
Yeah, I'm really a firm believer in that. I mean, that's like what I mean, when I had an experience along these lines, which we've talked about before, I didn't talk to anyone about it because I didn't think anyone would be able to understand it, and it would just come off weird. And I even know a lot of people, through the podcast, I know a lot of people who are into mysticism and occultism and stuff like that. But I didn't really talk to anyone really straight up about it until we had our first conversation. And it was after that I went and started digging, and then I found, and I looked at Golden Flower and I found your books and stuff. And then I'm like, oh, okay, this is speaking my language here. This makes sense. But before that, I was like, I can't really explain this to anyone. I can't really talk about it. It's not even like, it'd almost be better if aliens had landed and I saw a flying saucer, because at least I could say flying saucer, people know what that is. But it's like, this like internal kind of stuff. It's like, it's hard to put words to it until you really, get, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it has its own language. It's true. Like, I search for a better word than sensation, because, and you try to use at least like more than 20 words, and it's very, I don't even know if there's 20 words that you can use there. It's so they're just not words for what's going on. And
yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's so sometimes I feel that like sensation, really like attention and sensation and energy and breath, they all sometimes at some point it's like it's all the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like there needs to be one word for all of that stuff. And then I realized if I talk to someone else and I'm talking about sensation, trying to find a sensation, I realize they have no idea. They just it's totally inadequate from what I'm thinking of internally about it,
Well,
what I have associated with that.
A stroke is maybe the first time a person has a so-called sensation. You know, I mean, you could go through life, even if you break your leg playing football, the pain is going to cover the thing, and the doctor's going to shoot you full of Novocaine or something, and then put your leg in a cast, and that's about it. You're not, but there's no. Maybe you might feel the throbbing when it wears off, so that's a sensation. But you're not going to have a whole lot of sensations unless they're medically they're medical origin, like the onset of some disease. You might have feel something. It's usually you that feels it, and then you go to the doctor. But up to many people don't have that in their life up to age 60. I mean, they're so yeah. That's a great point you made.
All right, great. Well, hey, thank you again. Always a great conversation. I always appreciate it. I learned so much from you, and I appreciate everything you're doing. And so we'll talk again Wednesday.
All right, Paul.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.